The morning sun cast long shadows across the military training ground as General Marcus Thompson surveyed the scene before him. 13 of the Army's finest marksmen lay sprawled behind their rifles, sweat beading on their foreheads despite the cool mountain air. Each had taken their shot at the distant target, a small metal plate barely visible at 4,000 meters. Each had failed. The general's weathered face showed no emotion as he walked past the line of elite snipers. These were men who had served in multiple theaters of war, soldiers whose precision had saved countless lives in combat. Their credentials were impeccable, their training extensive, their equipment state-of-the-art. Yet today, against this particular challenge, they had all fallen short. "Sir, the wind conditions are impossible," muttered Sergeant Rodriguez, wiping his brow. "The crosswinds are shifting every 30 seconds, and the heat distortion is making range estimation nearly impossible." General Thompson nodded but said nothing. He had seen impossible shots made under worse conditions. He had also seen careers ended by a single missed opportunity. Today's exercise was more than just training. It was a test that would determine who would be selected for an upcoming classified mission where such extreme range accuracy would mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Among the small crowd of observers stood Maria Santos, a 34-year-old woman whose presence seemed almost out of place among the hardened military personnel. She wore simple civilian clothes and carried herself with quiet dignity, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Most of the soldiers barely noticed her, assuming she was perhaps a contractor's wife or a civilian employee from the base commissary. Maria had arrived that morning with Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base's intelligence officer, though few understood the connection. She spoke little and observed much, her keen eyes taking in every detail of the failed attempts. While the snipers adjusted their scopes and debated wind calculations, Maria studied the terrain, the way the heat waves danced above the valley floor, and the subtle patterns in the distant tree line that indicated air movement. The truth was that Maria Santos had a gift that couldn't be taught in any military academy. Growing up in the mountains of rural Colorado, she had learned to read the land the way others read books. Her father, a hunting guide and former Marine, had taught her that successful shooting was less about the weapon and more about understanding the environment. By age 16, she could consistently hit targets at ranges that amazed seasoned hunters. After high school, Maria had chosen a different path than military service. She became a wildlife biologist, spending years in remote wilderness areas where her shooting skills were essential for tranquilizing dangerous animals or protecting research camps from predators. Her work required shots that were often more challenging than combat situations, where the target might be a moving bear at extreme range in high winds or poor visibility. Colonel Hayes had discovered Maria's extraordinary abilities during a joint operation 2 years earlier, when a rogue grizzly bear had threatened a military survival training exercise. The local authorities had been unable to tranquilize the animal after multiple attempts, and the situation was becoming dangerous. Maria had volunteered to help, successfully tranquilizing the 800-pound bear with a single shot at over 600 meters while it was moving through heavy brush. That incident had led to an informal relationship between Maria and the military, where she occasionally consulted on wildlife management issues at remote bases. Her official clearance was limited, but Colonel Hayes had quietly documented Maria's exceptional marksmanship abilities, knowing that such skills might someday prove valuable. As the 13th sniper packed up his equipment in frustration, General Thompson turned to address the group. His voice carried across the range with military authority, but there was also a note of concern. The mission that had prompted this exercise was scheduled to proceed in just 2 weeks, and without a marksman capable of making this shot, the entire operation was in jeopardy. "Gentlemen," the general began, his eyes scanning the assembled soldiers, "I understand the difficulty of this challenge. The conditions are indeed extreme, and the distance pushes the limits of even our best equipment. However, the reality of our upcoming mission demands this level of precision." He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle over the group. Several of the snipers shifted uncomfortably, knowing that their failure might have broader consequences than their individual pride. "The target in 2 weeks won't be a metal plate on a static range," General Thompson continued. "It will be a high-value target in a hostile environment, where the lives of our extraction team depend on one perfect shot. We cannot afford to fail." Sergeant Martinez, the most senior of the failed marksmen, stepped forward. "Sir, with respect, perhaps we need to reconsider the mission parameters. A 4,000-meter shot in these conditions, it might simply be beyond what's tactically feasible." The general's expression hardened. "Failure is not an option, Sergeant. If we cannot find someone capable of making this shot, we'll have to cancel the operation entirely, and that means leaving our people behind." It was at this moment that Colonel Hayes stepped forward, her decision made. She had wrestled with whether to reveal Maria's presence and abilities, knowing that doing so would forever change the civilian woman's life. But with 13 elite soldiers unable to complete the task, and with lives hanging in the balance, the choice became clear. "General Thompson," Colonel Hayes said, her voice steady despite her inner uncertainty, "I may have a solution." The general turned toward her, one eyebrow raised in question. The failed snipers also looked in her direction, curious about what the intelligence officer might suggest. "There's someone here who I believe might be able to make this shot," Hayes continued, then gestured toward Maria, who had been standing quietly near the observation area. A murmur of surprise and skepticism rippled through the group of soldiers. Several of them looked at Maria with expressions ranging from confusion to outright disbelief. Here was a woman in civilian clothes, with no visible military bearing, being suggested as a solution to a challenge that had defeated some of the Army's most elite marksmen. Sergeant Rodriguez couldn't hide his incredulity. "Colonel, with all due respect, we're talking about a shot that requires years of specialized training and experience under combat conditions." General Thompson held up a hand for silence, his analytical mind already working. He had served long enough to know that conventional thinking didn't always produce the best results. Some of the most successful operations in military history had succeeded because someone was willing to consider unconventional solutions. "Colonel Hayes," he said carefully, "what makes you believe this civilian might succeed where our trained snipers have failed?" Hayes took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would either vindicate her judgment or potentially damage her career. "Sir, I've witnessed her marksmanship abilities firsthand. 2 years ago, she made a shot that our own marksman said was impossible." She then recounted the incident with the grizzly bear, describing not just the difficulty of the shot, but also the calm professionalism Maria had displayed under pressure. As she spoke, she noticed that Maria remained silent, neither confirming nor denying the colonel's account, simply waiting to see what would be asked of her. General Thompson studied Maria with new interest. He had learned to read people quickly and accurately, and what he saw was someone who possessed an unusual combination of humility and quiet confidence. She wasn't boasting about her abilities or demanding attention, but neither did she seem intimidated by the military environment or the challenge at hand. "Ma'am," the general addressed Maria directly, "are you willing to attempt this shot?" Maria looked at him steadily for a moment before responding. "General, I can try. But I'd like to study the conditions a bit more and understand exactly what's required." Her response impressed him. A less experienced shooter might have either boasted about their abilities or immediately declined such a daunting challenge. Maria's measured response suggested someone who understood both her own capabilities and the gravity of the situation. The failed snipers watched with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism as Maria walked toward the firing line. Some whispered among themselves, questioning how a civilian could possibly succeed where they had failed. Others, particularly the more experienced soldiers, reserved judgment, knowing that military service had taught them to expect the unexpected. As Maria knelt beside one of the rifles and began examining the equipment, General Thompson found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about marksmanship and military training. Perhaps the answer to their problem wouldn't come from conventional military sources after all. The stage was set for an extraordinary test of skill, one that would either validate an unconventional choice or confirm that some challenges truly were impossible to overcome. Maria Santos knelt beside the precision rifle, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she examined the weapon systems that 13 elite soldiers had already tested. The rifle was a modified Barrett M82A1, equipped with advanced optics and environmental sensors that cost more than most people's annual salary. Yet despite all this technology, it had failed to bridge the gap between shooter and target at 4,000 meters. While the gathered soldiers watched with barely concealed skepticism, Maria began her own unique preparation routine. She ignored the high-tech wind meters and ballistic computers that the previous shooters had relied upon. Instead, she pulled a few blades of grass from the ground and tossed them into the air, watching intently as they drifted and fell. This simple action drew surprised looks from the military marksmen, who had come to depend on sophisticated equipment for environmental readings. "The grass tells you more than any machine," Maria said quietly to Colonel Hayes, who had positioned herself nearby. "It shows you what the air is actually doing, not what the computers think it should be doing." Maria stood and walked several hundred meters in different directions, occasionally stopping to observe dust patterns, the movement of distant vegetation, and even the behavior of birds in the area. Her actions seemed almost ritualistic to the watching soldiers, but Maria was gathering information that no electronic device could provide. She was reading the landscape the way a scholar might read an ancient text, understanding that every detail held significance. General Thompson watched this unusual preparation with growing interest. In his 30 years of military service, he had seen countless shooting demonstrations and training exercises. The standard military approach involved precise calculations, technological measurements, and systematic adjustments based on known variables. Maria's method appeared almost primitive in comparison, yet there was something methodical and purposeful about her approach that commanded respect. After nearly an hour of observation and preparation, Maria returned to the firing line. She adjusted the rifle's position slightly, moving it just a few inches from where the previous shooters had placed it. This seemingly minor adjustment was based on her reading of the micro-terrain, understanding how the slight elevation changes would affect air currents at the firing point. Sergeant Martinez, still skeptical but curious, approached Maria. "Ma'am, aren't you going to use the ballistic computer? It calculates everything for you. Wind speed, humidity, air pressure, temperature gradients." Maria smiled politely. "The computer can tell you what the conditions were when it took its measurements. But conditions change constantly. What I need to know is what they'll be when the bullet reaches its target 3.5 seconds from now." This response struck several of the watching soldiers as either profound wisdom or complete nonsense. The more experienced marksmen, however, began to understand that Maria possessed an intuitive grasp of external ballistics that went beyond what could be taught in any training manual. As Maria settled into her shooting position, she made additional adjustments that puzzled the observers. She moved the rifle's bipod slightly, altered her body position, and even adjusted her breathing pattern to match what she sensed about the environmental conditions. Each change was subtle but deliberate, part of a comprehensive approach to the shot that treated the rifle, shooter, and environment as a single, integrated system. Colonel Hayes found herself holding her breath as she watched Maria's final preparations. She had recommended the civilian marksman based on one extraordinary shot 2 years ago, but now she realized that Maria's success or failure would reflect directly on her own judgment. If Maria failed, Hayes would face questions about her decision-making and possibly damage to her career. If Maria succeeded, it would validate an unconventional approach that might change how the military thought about marksmanship training. General Thompson checked his watch and noted that Maria had spent significantly more time in preparation than any of the previous shooters. While some might interpret this as hesitation or uncertainty, the general recognized it as thorough professionalism. The most successful military operations often succeeded because someone took the time to properly prepare rather than rushing into action. "Ma'am," the general called out, "are you ready to attempt the shot?" Maria looked up from her rifle scope and nodded. "Almost, sir. I need about 2 more minutes for the wind pattern to cycle back to optimal conditions." This statement surprised everyone present. The idea that Maria could predict wind patterns with such precision seemed almost impossible, yet she spoke with quiet confidence that suggested years of experience reading natural environments. As promised, exactly 2 minutes later, Maria settled behind the rifle and began her final approach to the shot. Unlike the previous shooters, who had taken their shots relatively quickly once positioned, Maria spent several minutes simply observing through her scope. She was watching not just the target, but the entire path the bullet would travel, noting how different atmospheric conditions along the route would affect the projectile's flight. The soldiers watching from behind could see Maria's breathing slow and regularize, entering what experienced marksmen recognized as the zone of peak concentration. Her body became perfectly still, not with tension, but with the relaxed focus of someone completely comfortable with their task. Through her scope, Maria could see the distant target shimmering in the heat waves that rose from the valley floor. At 4,000 meters, the metal plate appeared as just a tiny speck, barely distinguishable from the surrounding terrain. But Maria's experienced eye could read the subtle signs that indicated exactly where the target was positioned and how environmental factors would influence her bullet's path. She made minute adjustments to her aim, corrections so small they would be invisible to casual observers, but critical to the success of an extreme-range shot. Maria was compensating not just for wind and gravity, but for the Coriolis effect caused by the Earth's rotation, the varying air density along the bullet's flight path, and even the slight movement of the rifle caused by her own heartbeat. The moment of truth approached as Maria's finger found the trigger. Unlike the tense, hurried shots of the previous marksman, Maria's approach remained calm and methodical. She had identified the perfect moment, a brief window when all environmental factors aligned optimally, and she waited patiently for that moment to arrive. Sergeant Rodriguez found himself unconsciously holding his breath as he watched Maria's final preparations. Despite his initial skepticism, he was beginning to understand that he was witnessing something extraordinary. This woman's approach to extreme-range shooting was unlike anything he had learned in military training, yet it possessed an internal logic that impressed him. The other failed marksmen watched in silence, their professional pride warring with their genuine curiosity about whether Maria could succeed where they had failed. Some hoped she would miss, validating their own failures as evidence of an impossible challenge. Others, more secure in their abilities, found themselves genuinely hoping she would succeed, understanding that her success would advance the knowledge and capabilities of their entire profession. General Thompson observed not just Maria's technique, but also the reactions of his soldiers. He was already considering the implications of what was unfolding. If Maria succeeded, it would raise questions about current military training methods and suggest that there might be valuable knowledge outside traditional military channels. If she failed, it would confirm that some challenges required conventional military training and equipment to overcome. Colonel Hayes stood with her arms crossed, trying to project confidence while internally wrestling with doubt. She had staked her professional reputation on Maria's abilities based on limited evidence. Now, surrounded by elite military marksmen who had all failed the same challenge, she wondered if her judgment had been cloudy. As the critical moment approached, Maria made one final microscopic adjustment to her aim. Her breathing had synchronized with the natural rhythm of the environment around her, and her body had achieved the perfect balance between relaxation and readiness. Every aspect of her preparation had led to this single moment when shooter, rifle, environment, and target would align in perfect harmony. The silence on the range became absolute as Maria's finger began its slow, steady squeeze of the trigger. Years of experience in wilderness environments had taught her that success in extreme shooting required not just technical skill, but also the patience to wait for exactly the right moment and the confidence to execute perfectly when that moment arrived. What happened next would either vindicate an unconventional approach to an extraordinary challenge or confirm that some military tasks required traditional military solutions. Either way, the outcome would be remembered by everyone present as a defining moment in their understanding of what was possible in the world of precision marksmanship. The crack of the rifle shot split the morning air with a sharp report that echoed off the surrounding mountains. Maria Santos remained perfectly still in her shooting position, her eye still pressed to the scope, watching and waiting. At extreme range, the time between trigger pull and impact stretched into an eternity of suspense, where 3.5 seconds felt like 3.5 minutes. The gathered soldiers stood frozen in anticipation, many unconsciously leaning forward as they strained to see the distant target. At 4,000 meters, the impact would be impossible to see with the naked eye, and they would have to wait for confirmation from the spotting team positioned with high-powered telescopes near the target area. Through her scope, Maria tracked the bullet's theoretical path, her experienced eye following the invisible trajectory based on years of reading ballistics in challenging environments. She remained motionless, not from tension, but from the deep concentration of someone who understood that the shot's success or failure was now entirely beyond her control. General Thompson found himself checking his stopwatch, counting down the seconds until impact. His military mind automatically calculated the bullet's flight time based on the ammunition specifications and range, but part of him remained skeptical that any shooter could succeed where 13 elite marksmen had failed. The radio crackled to life from the downrange observation post. Target! Target! Confirmed hit! Direct center mass on the plate! A moment of stunned silence followed the announcement, as if no one could quite believe what they had heard. Then the radio voice continued, with unmistakable excitement. That was a perfect hit! Dead center of the target! The transformation in the gathered soldiers was immediate and dramatic. Expressions of skepticism and doubt changed to amazement and respect. Sergeant Martinez was the first to approach Maria, who had finally lifted her head from the rifle scope and was sitting back on her heels with a small, satisfied smile. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice filled with genuine admiration, "that was the most incredible shot I've ever witnessed. How did you do what 13 of us couldn't?" Maria stood and brushed dust from her civilian clothes, her demeanor remaining humble despite the extraordinary achievement. "You all had the technical skills to make that shot," she replied quietly. "The difference was in reading the environment. Military training teaches you to use technology to measure conditions, but sometimes you need to feel them instead." Colonel Hayes felt a wave of relief wash over her, followed immediately by professional pride. Her decision to recommend Maria had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. But more importantly, a seemingly impossible mission now had a realistic chance of success. General Thompson stepped forward, his weathered face showing genuine respect. "Miss Santos, that was remarkable marksmanship. I've been in the military for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone make a shot like that under these conditions." "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, "but I hope you understand that I'm not looking to become a soldier. I have my own work that I find fulfilling." The general nodded, already anticipating this response. I understand completely. However, I hope you'll consider helping us with our upcoming mission. It would involve a similar shot to what you just accomplished, but the stakes would be considerably higher. As General Thompson began to outline the classified operation, Maria listened with growing seriousness. The mission involved extracting a high-value intelligence asset from deep behind enemy lines. The success of the extraction depended on neutralizing a single target from extreme range, creating a brief window of opportunity for the rescue team to complete their task. The 13 soldiers who had failed the test gathered around to listen as the general explained how Maria's unique skills could make the difference between mission success and potential catastrophe. Several of them asked technical questions about her shooting technique, genuinely interested in learning from someone who had achieved what they could not. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been among the most skeptical initially, found himself studying Maria with new eyes. "Ma'am, where did you learn to shoot like that? Did you have military training that we weren't told about?" Maria shook her head. "My father taught me to hunt in the Colorado mountains when I was young. Later, my work as a wildlife biologist required shots in challenging conditions where you only get one chance. You learn to read the environment because there's no room for error when you're trying to tranquilize a dangerous animal." This explanation fascinated the military marksman who had never considered how civilian applications might develop skills that exceeded military training in certain specialized areas. Maria's background represented a different approach to marksmanship, one that emphasized intuitive understanding of natural conditions over technological solutions. Colonel Hayes interjected with practical concerns. "Maria, if you agree to help with this mission, we'll need to get you properly briefed and equipped. The target won't be a static metal plate, and the environmental conditions will be different from today's test." "I understand," Maria replied thoughtfully. "But before I commit to anything, I need to understand exactly what I'll be asked to do and who might be put at risk by my decision." General Thompson appreciated her careful approach. Too many people made important decisions based on emotion or incomplete information. Maria's insistence on understanding the full scope of her commitment suggested the kind of mature judgment that successful missions required. Over the next 2 hours, Maria received a detailed briefing about the extraction mission. She learned about the intelligence asset trapped behind enemy lines, the narrow window of opportunity for extraction, and the critical role that her marksmanship would play in the operation's success. The briefing also covered the risks involved, both to the extraction team and to Maria herself. As the briefing concluded, Maria asked several pointed questions that impressed the military officers with their insight. She wanted to know about escape routes, communication protocols, and backup plans if her shot failed to achieve its intended effect. Her questions revealed someone who understood that successful operations required comprehensive planning, not just technical skill. "General," Maria said finally, "I'll need to see the actual mission location and understand the environmental conditions there. Today's shot was successful, but every location presents unique challenges." General Thompson smiled, recognizing the voice of a true professional. "Of course. We'll arrange for you to visit the area and conduct whatever preparation you feel is necessary." The failed marksmen began to disperse, but several approached Maria before leaving. Their initial skepticism had been replaced by genuine respect and curiosity about her techniques. Sergeant Martinez asked if she would be willing to share some of her environmental reading methods with the unit's training program. "I'd be honored to help," Maria replied. "But understand that what I do isn't really teachable in a conventional sense. It comes from years of experience reading specific environments. Each location has its own personality." As the range began to empty, Colonel Hayes remained with Maria and General Thompson to discuss the logistics of the upcoming mission. The classified operation was scheduled to proceed in 10 days, leaving little time for preparation and training. "Maria," Colonel Hayes said, "you've accomplished something extraordinary today. But I want you to understand that the real mission will be far more challenging than today's test. There will be pressure, danger, and lives depending on your shot." Maria nodded seriously. "Colonel, I've been in life-or-death situations before. When you're trying to tranquilize a charging grizzly bear to protect researchers, you learn to perform under pressure. The stakes tomorrow won't be higher than they were in those moments." General Thompson studied Maria's face as she spoke, noting the quiet confidence that had first caught his attention. This was someone who had been tested under pressure and had proven capable of performing when it mattered most. The military valued such people, regardless of whether they wore uniforms. As the sun began to set over the mountain range, casting long shadows across the shooting range, Maria packed up her few personal items and prepared to leave. The metal target that had defeated 13 elite marksmen now bore the unmistakable mark of her single perfect shot. "Miss Santos," General Thompson called as she prepared to depart, "when this mission is complete, I hope you'll consider working with us on a more regular basis. We could learn a great deal from your approach to marksmanship." Maria paused and looked back at the general. "Sir, I appreciate the offer, but my work with wildlife is where I belong. However, if you ever face a situation like this again, where conventional methods aren't sufficient, I'll be willing to help." As Maria's vehicle disappeared down the mountain road, General Thompson and Colonel Hayes stood in contemplative silence. They had begun the day facing an impossible challenge that threatened to derail a critical mission. They were ending it with renewed confidence in an unconventional solution. The story of Maria Santos and her extraordinary shot would become legend within military marksmanship circles. But more importantly, it would serve as a reminder that sometimes the best solutions to complex problems come from unexpected sources, and that true expertise can be found in places where conventional wisdom might never think to look. 10 days later, in a hostile environment thousands of miles away, Maria's skills would be tested under conditions that would make today's challenge seem simple by comparison. But for now, she had proven that when the general had asked if any snipers were present, the answer had come from the most unlikely source imaginable: a humble wildlife biologist whose gift for reading the natural world had just changed the course of a critical military operation.